Somewhere on your street, in a house you've probably driven past 100 times, there's a person sitting on close to $1 million. You wouldn't know it from a car in the driveway. You wouldn't know it from the clothes on their back. That's not an accident. That's the entire point. Real wealth in 2026 doesn't shout. It doesn't post. It doesn't need you to notice it. And that quiet invisibility is exactly why almost everyone misreads who actually has money and who's just borrowing the appearance of it. Here's the idea that changes how you see everything once it clicks. Money you can see is usually money that's already gone. The watch, the lease, the remodeled kitchen everyone comments on. All of that is spinning wearing a costume. It looks like wealth, but it's actually the opposite. It's what's left after wealth walked out the door. What you're looking at is a receipt, not a bank statement. Think about what a car payment actually is. Say you finance a $46,000 truck. You're committing to roughly $680 a month for 6 years, and the truck is worth less the moment you drive it home, less every month after that. Now picture someone who buys a plain, reliable used car instead and quietly invests that same $680 a month. At the stock market's long-run average return, 6 years turns that boring decision into somewhere around $65,000. One person is driving a symbol. The other is quietly building a floor under their entire future. Here's the uncomfortable part. From the outside, the second person looks like they're doing worse. You're trained to read wealth in objects, by advertising, by social feeds, by 1,000 tiny signals telling you the flashiest life belongs to the person with the most. Most of the time, it's backwards. The loudest spender is often the most fragile one. 2 missed paychecks away from panic, holding it together with minimum payments and hope. The quiet one, the one who looks like they might be struggling, is frequently the one who sleeps just fine. And this isn't a vibe. There's real data behind it. And it's worth sitting with for a second. The largest survey of millionaires ever conducted, over 10,000 of them, tore apart almost everything people assume about how the rich got that way. 79% never received an inheritance. Not a small one. None at all. Only a tiny fraction ever got a windfall of $1 million or more from family. The trust fund story you've been told about how rich people get rich is, for the overwhelming majority, simply not true. It gets stranger. Roughly a third of these millionaires never once earned 6 figures in a single working year of their entire career. Sit with that. A third of them never had what most people would call a big salary, not once, and they still crossed 7 figures. The jobs that produced the most millionaires weren't glamorous. Engineer, accountant, teacher, all landed near the very top. Only about 15% of them ever held a senior leadership title. This wasn't a club of executives. It was an army of ordinary earners doing unremarkable things consistently for a long time. And that consistency is exactly where we're headed next. So what were all those quiet millionaires actually doing? Nothing that would ever go viral. 93% of them said the same thing when asked how they built their wealth. Hard work and consistency, not a big salary and not a lucky break. No dramatic origin story. No perfect stock pick. Just the same unglamorous behavior, repeated for 20 or 30 years in a row. That repetition is the entire secret, and to understand why it works, you need to understand the engine sitting underneath it. That engine is compounding, and it is spectacularly boring to watch in real time. Over the last 100 years, the broad American stock market has returned somewhere around 10% a year on average. Any single year bounces all over the place, up 30%, down 20%, flat for a while. But stretched across decades, that average does something your intuition isn't built to handle. There's a shortcut called the rule of 72. Take 72, divide it by your annual return, and you get roughly how many years it takes your money to double. At the market's long-run average, your money doubles about every 7 years. Doubling doesn't feel impressive until you follow out. $1 becomes 2, then 4, then 8, then 16. The early doublings feel pointless. The later ones are enormous. This is exactly why the people who win with money are almost never the exciting ones. The exciting investor is jumping in and out, chasing whatever's hot, interrupting the doubling right when it starts to matter. The boring investor buys a plain index fund and does the single hardest thing in personal finance. Nothing. They leave it alone. Here's how quietly that patience turns into something enormous. Put $550 a month into a plain index fund earning that long-run average, and after 32 years, you're sitting on more than $1.3 million. You didn't do anything clever. You just kept feeding the machine and refused to touch it. Now here's the part that should make anyone younger lean in. Start that same $550 a month at 25 instead of 35, and you don't end up with a little more. You end up with roughly 3 times as much. 10 years of doing nothing exciting early can be worth well over $1 million by itself. Time is the ingredient, and time only pays out to people calm enough to wait for it. Only about 15% of those 10,000 millionaires ever sat in a senior leadership seat. Most of them weren't chasing a promotion or a title. They were feeding an account on a schedule and letting 7 straight decades of doubling do the heavy lifting for them. The math doesn't care how exciting your job title sounds. It only cares whether you started and whether you stopped touching it once you did. And once you see how much of the outcome is decided by time instead of talent, the next question becomes obvious. How do the people who actually pull this off keep themselves from touching it? It's rarely willpower. Willpower runs out by Wednesday. The people who actually reach 7 figures this way tend to remove the decision entirely. So the money is gone from their checking account before they ever get a chance to talk themselves out of it. That single design choice, more than any stock pick or side hustle, is what separates the people quietly compounding in the background from everyone still meaning to start next month. I want to show you one number that captures this entire idea in a single gap. Vanguard tracks the retirement accounts of nearly 5 million American workers, and in their most recent report, the average 401k balance came out to about $168,000. That sounds encouraging until you look at the median, the balance sitting at the exact middle of everyone. The median was only about $44,000. Sit with how wide that gap is. The average is nearly 4 times the median. That's not a rounding quirk. That gap is the whole story. A relatively small group of quiet, consistent savers has built such large balances that they drag the average far above what a typical person actually has, and a $44,000 balance, drawn down responsibly, produces something like $150 a month in retirement. That's the real emergency, and it's happening quietly, without anyone posting about it. So how do the quiet ones pull ahead? The first move is almost embarrassingly simple. They automate. Real wealth isn't built through heroic willpower every single month. It's built through a decision you make once and then forget about. The people who pull this off set up an automatic transfer that moves money into investments the same day their paycheck lands, before they can feel it, spend it, or negotiate with themselves. They pay themselves first and let the boring machinery run quietly in the background of their lives. When the wealthy choice is the automatic one, people build wealth almost by accident. When the exciting choice is the default, they stay broke almost by accident. That's the entire mechanism. Underneath the investing sits a second boring layer nobody wants to talk about: the humble emergency fund. Right now, a solid high-yield savings account pays somewhere around 4%, while a typical big bank savings account pays a fraction of a single percent. Move $12,000 out of a sleepy account and into a high-yield one, and you go from earning a few dollars a year to earning close to $480 for doing nothing but paying attention once. But the interest isn't even the main reason it matters. The real job of that cash cushion is emotional. When your car dies or your job disappears, the person with 3 to 6 months of expenses saved handles it and moves on with their week. The person without it does the single most damaging thing an investor can do. They panic sell, yanking money out of the market at the worst possible moment, locking in a loss and interrupting years of quiet compounding. The boring emergency fund is what lets the boring investment survive a genuinely bad month. There's one more habit that shows up again and again in the people who quietly get wealthy, and it's their old-fashioned relationship with debt. The large majority of that same group of 10,000 millionaires said they'd never once carried a credit card balance in their entire lives, and the overwhelming majority said they simply live on less than they make. Read those two facts together, and a pattern forms. These are people who treat a credit card as a tool, not a lifeline, who pay it in full every single month, and who refuse to rent a lifestyle they can't yet afford. High-interest debt is compounding working against you instead of for you, with the exact same patience that makes investing so effective in the other direction. You can't out-earn interest that's running the other way, so the people who end up quietly wealthy simply refuse to let it start. There's a second pillar sitting underneath the investing, and it might be the least glamorous purchase in the world. A home you can actually afford, slowly paid off. The numbers here are hard to argue with. Recent federal data puts the median net worth of American homeowners at somewhere around $400,000, while the median for renters sits closer to $10,000. That's a gap of almost 40 to 1. A paid-off house isn't exciting. Nobody films the moment they make their last mortgage payment the way they film a new car pulling into the driveway. But it quietly erases the single largest expense most families carry, right around the time their working income starts to fade. Invest steadily in a retirement account, buy a reasonable home, and actually pay it off. That's most of the whole recipe. No leverage, no flipping, no drama, just two boring decisions repeated for a couple of decades. Now here's the pattern that quietly wrecks more high earners than any recession ever has. Lifestyle creep. You get a raise, and within a month or two, your spending rises to swallow it. A slightly bigger apartment, a nicer car, a little more of everything. The raise vanishes into the lifestyle, and your savings rate never actually moves. You could double your income over 10 years and end up exactly as fragile as when you started, just with fancier problems. Picture your coworker for a second, the one who looks like he's already made it. Great car, sharp watch, a vacation every few months. Everyone assumes he's sitting on money, but his spending climbed to match every single raise he ever got. So he's saving almost nothing, and if his paycheck stopped tomorrow, his entire lifestyle would start collapsing within about 2 months. Now picture the retired school teacher 2 houses down who never once cracked 6 figures in her career. She drove the same modest car for a decade, stayed in the same small house, and quietly invested a slice of every paycheck for 35 years. She's a millionaire. Your coworker looks rich and is fragile. She looks ordinary and is free. Only one of them has to worry, and it isn't the one you'd guess just from looking. The people who quietly build wealth do something that feels almost strange in a culture built on more. They define enough. They decide on purpose what a genuinely good life costs for them, and then they let their income climb past that line without letting their spending follow it. When a raise lands, the difference goes into investing instead of an upgrade. From the outside, it looks like they're leaving joy on the table. What they're actually doing is buying the single most valuable thing money can purchase, which is freedom, and freedom is never once photographed well. That's exactly why you never see it on anyone's feed. If this is starting to reshape how you look at your own paycheck, stick around, because the next example takes this idea and puts it in front of one of the richest human beings alive, someone who could buy almost anything on earth and has spent 70 years deliberately choosing not to. Warren Buffett is worth well over $100 billion, and he still lives in the same house in Omaha that he bought back in 1958 for $31,500. That home is worth well over $1 million today, meaning it quietly climbed more than 40 times in value while he simply lived in it, raised a family in it, and never once felt the need to trade up. He still drives himself around town. For years, he carried an old flip phone long after everyone else had upgraded, and he's talked openly about being perfectly content with a breakfast that costs a few dollars. At a certain point, he said, possessions start to possess you. The richest investor of his generation chose the boring house, the boring car, and the boring routine, and that choice isn't a quirk. It's the same philosophy that built the fortune in the first place. And he's still making that exact point at 95. In the middle of 2026, with the market grinding to record highs and enormous sums pouring into the fastest, flashiest bets available, Buffett sat down for an interview and didn't hold back. He said it's become genuinely difficult to find real value in a market where almost everyone around him would rather gamble than invest. Berkshire Hathaway was sitting on a record cash pile of close to $400 billion at the time, because he'd rather hold cash than chase prices he doesn't believe in. He went further, pointing out that there's simply more money to be made stoking gamblers than there ever is cultivating patient investors, and that's the uncomfortable engine running underneath so much of modern finance. The financial world is loud because loud is profitable for whoever's selling it to you. The boring path has no marketing budget because nobody gets rich selling you patience. You can see exactly what he means if you look at where the energy is flowing right now. Same-day options that expire within hours. Prediction markets where people wager on the news like it's a scoreboard. Whatever coin happens to be spiking that particular week. All of it is engineered to feel like opportunity, and all of it is loud by design, because that loudness is how it recruits you. The boring investor watches the entire circus, shrugs, and keeps sending the same automatic transfer into the same simple fund, month after month, year after year. A decade from now, most of the people chasing the noise will have a pile of stories and very little to actually show for them, while the person who is too bored to play will have quietly won without anyone watching. This is worth being honest about, because it explains why the boring truth stays buried. An entire industry is built on making you feel behind. The flashy trade, the hot new coin, the story of someone who supposedly got rich overnight, all of it is engineered to be exciting, because excitement is what sells. Steady index investing, an automatic transfer, and a paid-off modest car generate no headlines and no hype, so the quiet strategy that actually works keeps getting drowned out by the loud strategies that mostly don't. You're not behind because you missed some secret. You are behind, if you're behind at all, because the truth was simply too boring to trend. So let's be clear about what real wealth actually is underneath all of it. Forget the number you'd show someone else. What matters far more is the number of mornings you wake up without dread. Real wealth is the ability to absorb a surprise bill, a job loss, or a genuinely bad year without your whole life quietly falling apart. Underneath everything else, what you're really buying is options and calm, and time that belongs entirely to you. A truly secure life is often shockingly quiet, because peace has never needed an audience. And the whole reason it looks boring from the outside is that all the real action is happening somewhere nobody can see it. It helps to picture what this actually looks like on an ordinary Tuesday, because that's where real wealth quietly gives itself away. The secure person isn't doing anything remarkable at all. They're moving through a normal day like everyone else, except a surprise bill doesn't spike their heart rate, and a slow week at work doesn't keep them up at night. Their money is already handled, moving quietly in the background through transfers they set up years ago and barely think about anymore. There's no performance happening because there's no audience, and there's no need for one. That flat, almost dull sense of calm is the entire reward. It's the exact feeling that all the noise and all the spending is secretly trying to imitate, and it's the one version that can't be faked because it rests on what you actually have instead of what you've managed to make it look like you have. Here's the freeing part. If wealth is this boring, then it's also learnable, repeatable, and available to a regular person on a regular income. You don't need a viral moment or a genius idea. You need to spend less than you earn. Automate the difference into an index fund. Keep 3 to 6 months of expenses somewhere boring and liquid, so you're never forced to sell in a panic. Avoid interest that runs against you. Buy a home you can actually afford instead of the one you can barely qualify for. And then do the single hardest part, which is to wait while it compounds. That's not a secret reserved for the lucky. It's a boring routine you could start this month, and the earlier you start it, the more absurdly generous the math becomes on your behalf. The people who look rich are often just people spending their future to decorate their present. The people who actually are rich usually look like they're getting away with something completely ordinary. If this reshaped even a little of how you think about your own money, stick around and subscribe because we break down the calm, unglamorous side of getting wealthy every single week. Tell me in the comments which side of this you've lived. Have you ever chased the loud version of success and regretted it? Or quietly chosen the boring path and watched it pay off? Drop the number that stuck with you most, and let's keep building the boring, invisible kind of rich together, one unremarkable, automatic transfer at a time.